Have you ever had a time when you started to regret your behaviors or your reactions or the words that you say, or some, outcomes of the situation that you actually didn't like and you wanted to do a completely different thing? We are talking about the outcomes of trauma, the long-term outcomes of any traumatic experience that you have had in your childhood. Let's go. What is trauma? Trauma is that experience in your childhood, whether it was just one or maybe it was a repeated experience in your childhood where you couldn't handle the situation. It was painful, it was unexpected, it was isolated. And I always talk about it in different YouTube videos. So if you go back to my videos, you will find that information and even more information about what trauma is and what does it do to your psyche and how does that play out in your life. But today I want to focus on how the traumatic experience that was shut down, capsuled in childhood, sometimes even repressed into the unconscious, so you don't even remember that, or you justify that experience. For example, if your mom or dad were criticizing you a lot in childhood, you might feel like, they wanted the best for me, right? That's true. They did want the best for you. But have you worked through that behavior that came out of those experiences, of that childhood? If you didn't, the life will guide you to work through that all over again. And I call it a repeated experience. So the first outcome of the trauma in childhood is the repeated life experiences that happen in your life from time to time, or even very often, that you actually resent, you don't like it, or you are in pain, or you're suffering from these experiences. For example, you keep getting into the same relationship, into the same kind of relationship. Maybe it's an abusive relationship, or maybe you are a savior in a relationship because you used to save your parents long ago. Subconscious mind, right? All the trauma is in the subconscious mind. It doesn't understand time and it loves what's familiar. This is the rule of your mind. So when it makes something familiar, even if it's the biggest thing, it's going to repeat that experience all over again. Your reactions, for example, anger. You might notice that if you suppressed anger a lot in childhood, you might find yourself starting to really be impulsive, starting to get really angry. And usually it happens with people we really, really love, with our family members, because we trust them the most. That's why we can, I can be myself. I can show my, darkest sides to the people that I love and I trust. Right? We become very vulnerable with people that we love, and our family members suffer from that repeated life experience, repeated behavior or repeated reactions. That's a long-term outcome of traumatic experience. What does that mean? What does it mean if you keep going into the cycle of same events? You might feel even angry at the world, but in reality, the life is just guiding you to work through that. It means that your mind is ready to cope, to deal with that traumatic experience. And until you do that, because very often we run away from trauma, until you do that, your mind will keep giving, the world will keep giving you. You will keep manifesting the same events. Number 2, the outcome of the trauma is heightened sensibility or sensitivity, right? You become too heightened in your emotions. You feel everything strongly. The example will be the empath. People who became so alert, so attuned to other people's emotions, that they started to feel their emotions and the people around them, their emotions as well. So it's an overload on your psyche. Heightened emotional response, right, is also a protective mechanism, a coping mechanism in order for you to survive. The only thing is your subconscious mind doesn't know that you grew up, that you're an adult now, that you don't have to carry that same alertness, that cautious mind, that you look around, everyone's reactions, comments, feedback, how people moved, what people told you, what words do they use. You start to be so alert that it overwhelms you. That's the overthinkers, right? People who are empath, they overthink the conversations all the time because subconscious mind still thinks that it needs to be alert. So that can be a long term, right? And what people do in this situation when they have this long-term outcome of trauma, right? They suffer. They have a lot of emotional pain inside of them, right? They may be subject to manipulations, to narcissistic relationship as well, because they're very easily suggestible. They're taken on the outer world so on a deeper level. Number 3, what happens is avoidance. Avoidance is when people actually avoid the situation that they, at some point in childhood, they couldn't cope with. You see, your mind is 9-year-old mind, 5-year-old mind, 12-year-old mind. It doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the experience. You haven't lived the life that much in order to know how to react to yelling, screaming, abuse. You didn't know how to protect yourself. And sometimes we find ourselves not being able to do that even when we grow up. And people start to say, why? Why is it happening? Why am I still reacting? Why am I still having that behavior? The subconscious mind gives you this in order to work it through, because it bothers your subconscious mind. The trauma usually bothers your subconscious mind and it cannot resolve it. So it will keep talking to you in the emotional pain, because people who avoid feel lonely. People who avoid feel a lot of blame, guilt, and lack of purpose, lack of meaning in life, right? They start to blame and criticize and judge themselves so much because this is the only way they know. This is the only way they can cope with it and find the explanation for the avoidant personality, their avoidant behavior. Number 4, lack of emotions. Very often, the long-term outcome of the trauma is lack of emotion whatsoever. At some point, and we never know what your child's mind decided to do. Only you know. You might look at different experiences and you can track yourself and find what actually, oh, this is what happens to me. Oh, this is how I react to different, conversations or different events. Lack of emotion is when your mind decided that I'm not gonna feel anything because any emotion is so painful, right? So lack of positive emotions in childhood, right, brings us to kind of shut it down and say, I'm not going to feel anything. I'm not going to feel anything. So people who don't cry when their loved one died. I've had clients who would say, my mom died and I didn't even cry. The tears just didn't come out. I don't feel anything. And usually that's because you shut down on an emotional level and started to suppress all the emotions, joy, happiness, excitement included. You decided I'm going to be numb. That also happens when we are medicated. When we take anti-anxiety medication or antidepressant and medication, if you take it for many, many years, one of the side effects will be like this numbing of any emotion. So people don't feel happiness as well, don't feel joy, right? They're just in this kind of, numb mode. Number 5, the long-term outcome of childhood trauma is chronic emotions. So for example, if you felt sadness a lot of time in childhood, that became so familiar to you that sadness became your chronic emotion. Anger, same. Regret, hate, jealousy could be a chronic negative emotion as well. By the way, very toxic, right? Hate, blame, resentment, jealousy, and greed are very, very toxic, and then toxify not only our mind, but our body as well. Chronic toxic emotions can show up in depression, avoidance as well. The same reactions all over again, right? Lack of meaning. Sometimes even suicidal thoughts, because that chronic emotions all the time, you don't even know. And that's when I find out that when I ask clients, what do you want? And they say, I don't know. I've never had happiness. So how can I know how it feels? You if you want something, for example, I want to be happy, you've already experienced that before. That's just the reality. You don't know what it is if you haven't felt it. Then you wouldn't even want it because you don't know how it feels. If you want a joy, excitement, happiness, you've already had it. Maybe it was just small moments in your life, but you did have it. So you can recreate and go back to that and cultivate that feeling all over again. Chronic emotions can be, by the way, heightened excitement. You know, these like super, super happy, joyful people. It could be very genuine, by the way, and that's amazing, but it could be also hiding under that mask of a very happy person, right? Joyful, happy, oh, everything is great, everything's like heightened positivity. That also could be a response to fit in, to belong, to not be rejected. You need to go inwards and to find out what works for you. How to break that cycle. So you look at all of these 5 outcomes of trauma and you feel, well, okay, I know I have it. So what do I do? First of all, you need to acknowledge, yes, I have these attachment, like avoidance or heightened sensitivity or lack of emotions whatsoever. I have chronic emotion of sadness, for example, or lack of meaning. What do I do with it? Once you acknowledge it, you start to look around and find the method that will work for you and it will be unique to you. Right? For example, I work with my clients with RTT hypnotherapy because I find it the most effective method. And it's a journey to find out and break that cycle of those chronic, behaviors that don't work for you anymore. They did work. People sometimes feel, wow, this was so bad. How did I respond it in that way? Why did I form that behavior? At that time, when you were a child, it helped you. That's why your mind chose it. Your mind doesn't do anything that will not benefit you. It just doesn't know that it harms you. If it doesn't know, how can you blame your mind for that? You cannot blame your mind for not knowing. But once you start to learn about yourself, start to understand, wow, this is the pattern. So in order to change the life events that are happening in your life, you need to change the way you approach things, right? Like you cannot drive a bicycle wanting to drive a car and expecting that you're going to drive a car if you still ride a bicycle, right? It's the same. You need to put the bike aside and get into the car to start driving it. So you need to change something. And if you want to change, but you cannot, you need to find help who can guide you towards that change. No one can change for you. Very often if we are in the role of a victim, we're waiting for something to happen to us. Somewhere it's going to come, or it's going to get better in the future. That's true. Time heals a lot. However, if you don't work it through, it just suppresses until you start to feel physical symptoms. And when we start to feel physical symptoms, we usually don't want anything. Like we're like, oh, I wish just this illness would go away. We start to focus only on healing the body, but the body is the last body that shows the symptom. It's better to work it before it showed up in the physical symptoms, before it became serious, because the body is inert. It takes longer to heal than your mind. The mind is much easier, much more flexible than your body. So don't let it go into your body. Work through those outcomes that you're noticing right now from childhood trauma, so that you can live your life in a happy, more joyful, more fulfilled way. I hope this video was of value to you. Maybe you've recognized something. And I really hope that if you do, you can look at all of the other resources I offer in the description. I have an online course, You Are the Therapy, where you can work through many childhood beliefs and limiting beliefs and restrictions or those repeated behaviors that you had. You can work it through in a very gentle, meditative, but very enlightening way. So you can also work with me if you want to, and I can guide you. I can guide your mind to reframe, to change those beliefs, and to end and break that cycle. You can do it, but you can find the help that can guide you towards that way. Be healthy, emotionally and physically. My name is Kate. I'm a hypnotherapist and I love you all. Bye.